these three persons because from Ms. Gail we hope to hear what young people think about what governance and good governance ought to be as she responds to Dr. Thomas. And equally so from Mr. Smith and Mr. Pickering, perspectives from their respective fields of endeavor. We thank Sam Sharp and Principal Ricardo Bennett for allowing us to use the space. And I particularly want to thank you, those who have gathered here, the few of us here in the hall. And I think there are about 30 or so persons who are currently online, well on Zoom. I'm not sure what the numbers are on YouTube as yet. Thank you all for joining us in this engagement. We think it is important, we think it's necessary, and we think it is something that will redound to the benefit of our nation. We're not on a witch hunt, we're not trying to find skeletons in any closet. We just want to engage each other in a conversation that will lead our nation to better understandings of how we ought to relate with each other in society as people of Jamaica. Thank you very much for joining, and so I now ask our moderator to come and introduce our guest speaker.
Thank you, Reverend Dixon, General Secretary of the Jamaica Council of Churches. We are truly grateful, friends, to have the Reverend Dr. Oral Thomas in our presence, in our midst. He is the president of the United Theological College of the West Indies. He's a man who has written several books and one who interprets the scripture in such a way for clear understanding and comprehension. Today we have him to present to us on the theme, Good Governance in Pursuit of Justice and Truth for Human Flourishing. So I'm going to invite him to come at this time to share with us. And as he shares, I invite us to listen attentively.
Thank you, Reverend Brown. As usual, you're quite generous in your commendation of your teacher. I greet those in this auditorium and online in the name of our common Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. I'm thankful to Reverend Newton Dixon, General Secretary of the Jamaica Council of Churches, for this opportunity to share with this august body, my conversation partners, in what is a relevant issue in Jamaica and the Caribbean at this time when democracy, the rule of law, and constitutional matters are influencing and engaging the way in which we live our lives today. I want to thank the Bishop, the Honorable Conrad Pitkin, Custos of Jamaica, of St. James.
That's okay.
He said that is okay. Of St. James, let me be clear, for his welcome. But I would like to remind you, Custos, that yes, I'm from Antigua, but I'm married to a Jamaican who hails from the parish of Hanover. So I need to accept your welcome in a very measured manner, or else when I get home this evening, I will have questions to answer. But thank you so very much for your welcome to St. James. As you have heard, the Topic for our presentation this evening is good governance, the pursuit of justice and truth for human flourishing. Governance refers to the system or process of governing which involves the decision and actions undertaken by a group of people, whether in government, organization, or community, to manage and regulate affairs effectively. It encompasses the structures, principles, and processes and practices through which authority is exercised and decisions are made. According to Trevor Munro, a Caribbean leading and noted public scholar, good governance typically involves responsiveness, transparency, accountability, fairness, participation, citizen participation, consensus-oriented decisions, and equity in adherence to the rule of law. Trevor states that it is crucial to ensure that resources are managed efficiently, conflicts are resolved fairly, and the needs and rights of individuals and groups are respected. What I want to do then this afternoon, having defined what governance is and what is good governance, I want to examine forms of governance in Israelite and Caribbean history, using the basic principles of good governance to judge whether they pursue justice and truth for human flourishing. What I will do, I'll also leave it for our conversation, led by our responders, to work out the implications of these forms of governance in our conversations. Note already that I am not limiting my presentation to Jamaica, but I am setting Jamaica within the context of the Caribbean. And so first of all, forms of government, forms of governance in Israelite history. Archaeological evidence places the people of Israel as settlers in small villages in the hill country of Judah and Israel during the pre-state tribal period 2050 to 1000 BC. That is during the rule of Saul, then David, and Solomon. I want then to draw contrast between the tributary political and economic system of imperial Israel, imperial Egypt, and tribal Israel. Now, when you examine the forms of governance in imperial Egypt, you will see that they were powerful, centralized state. That power was centralized in the state apparatus. There were socio-economic disparities. They had total control of the land, and the primary source of revenue was from the peasantry, both to the native rulers and to the overlords. And there was a ruling class. And that ruling class in that economic system laid upon the people onerous taxes and unjust loans. Payment was in the form of kind and conscription labor for public works or military service. And divine favor and protection come from serving the gods. In other words, imperial Egypt had a centralized system of governance. It was exploitative and it was discriminatory. They subjugated people, they deprived people of freedom, and they inculcate their values and seize the property of others. Unlike imperial Egypt, Israel was an anti-hierarchical movement. It was socially formed by tribes, politically opposed to tribute payment, military draft, and forced labor. As such, the right of outside states and empires to rule over them was renounced, and the setting up of a state structure was refused. Israel had a regulated an anarchy, that is, no single center of power, a decentralized social organization, but several power interests negotiating unity and distribution of resources. Israel's God was Yahweh. And Yahweh is a liberating God who rejected kingship and political hierarchy. And so Israel broke away from Egypt and the Canaanite domination and became a self-governing community of free peasants. But note this, within tribal groups, pressure was rising for a centralized system of governance due to population growth, incorporation of diverse cultural groups, and poor agricultural conditions. The Philistines were one of those cultural groups that shared life in the hill country of Palestine with Israel. The Philistines, as you will know from reading 1 Samuel, were well organized militarily and well resourced economically. Besides, they had an expansionist agenda to expand the authority and sphere of influence. In the significant defeat of Israel by the Philistines, recorded in 1 Samuel chapters 4 to 6, Israel lost the Ark of the Covenant, the forces of her tribes were scattered and disarmed, the central shrine at Shiloh and the city itself were destroyed, and the priesthood killed and were in disarray. In addition, the religious leadership had become corrupt, as you know, and self-serving. As such, there was growing pressure for radically new systems and structures for centralized governance and bold military leadership. Israel therefore had two choices: submit and become subordinates with the Philistine Empire, or organize new forms of social organization and leadership. Now, submitting to the Philistine would mean the imposition of hierarchy and social stratification from without. The centralization demanded from within would result in the same hierarchy and stratification from within. And so either way, Israel was headed towards forming organizational structures and systems that ran counter to her vision of a community organized for the practice of social justice, that is tribal confederacy or tribal league. What emerged then were two offices: prophet and king. The demand led to a division of judges' responsibilities, namely military, political tasks for the prince or the king, and discerning and announcing the word of the Lord, the prophet. And so in the move to monarchy, 1 Samuel chapter 8, the tributary political economy was at odds with tribal Israel's communitarian economy. The authority of state and empire that tribal Israel resisted was now brought into play to give religious blessing to the new formed state of Israel. And so monarchy was the acceptance of the leadership of Saul and David. And in the transition from tribal league to monarchy, the Israelite society shifted from a communitarian economy constitutive of equal access to resources, the means of production, a decentralized system of governance, freedom from excessive taxation and forced labor, to to a tributary economy. So they moved from a communitarian economy to a tributary economy that was characterized by a centralized system of government, a wealthy land-owning class, a military system, mass production of goods, and an economy oriented towards profit. Capitalism by another name. The shift, though, was filled with ambiguities and challenges. In fact, the shift arguably carried in it the seed of the destruction of Israel and Judah, as there was the attempt to combine the social organization of a state with its division of classes and labor, monarchy, with a vision of a community for social equality or justice, tribal league. I will contend then that the issue with the Westminster-style parliamentary system within a colonial and imperial context is that it is not about a vision for a community for social equality and justice. The Westminster-style parliamentary system, it is set up is too divisive to deliver social equality and justice. Now, despite the attendant difficulties and concerns, the transition brought considerable growth and development. With such wealth and prosperity, a small, wealthy, elite ruling class, it brought poverty to the majority, as the intention was never to improve and expand the means of production, land and waterways, in the interest of improving the living standards of the majority, but to exploit the production, land, waterways, and human labor. Even Amos was forced to acknowledge that it was a time of military and economic security, no foreign threat, and wealth security. Yet, as Anthony R. Siresco points out, the peace the ruling elite was enjoying was as a result of the war they were carrying on against the majority of their fellow Israelites. And the prosperity they enjoyed came at the expense of the poverty, of the suffering of the many. So the policies, for all its wealth, did not make for peace. There is no peace, holistic existence, without justice, that is, proper relations. Now, the transition then from tribal league to monarchy was characterized by the following: social disintegration, syncretism, mixing of different religious beliefs and practices, idolatry. Yahweh is not the object of devotion and lip service to Yahweh. So now, in tribal league, there was a communitarian economy. Equal access to resources and means of production, decentralized system of rule, freedom from excessive taxation and forced labor. But with monarchy, the tributary economy, there was a centralization of rule, military system, surplus economy, and mass production. The issue then is, which social system best serves justice and righteousness? The communitarian economy or the tributary economy? With these characteristics, the issue concerns which system of governance best serve justice and righteousness or contribute significantly to the pursuit and truth of human flourishing. You see, with tribal league and its communitarian economy, there is transparency, accountability, and judgment. Leaders are held accountable for their actions by God and the people they govern. There is justice and righteousness. Biblical governance emphasizes justice, fairness, and righteousness. Leaders are called to govern with integrity, ensuring that laws and policies promote the well-being of society and uphold the rights of all people, particularly the vulnerable and the marginalized. Micah 6:8. And there is also servant leadership. The Bible often portrays leadership as a form of service rather than domination. Leaders are called to serve the people they govern, following the examples of Jesus Christ, who washed his disciples' feet as a symbol of humility and service. So then, with Tribal League, there is accountability and judgment, there is justice and righteousness, and there is servant leadership. But with monarchy and its tributary economy, there is no response to civil society. Accountability, fairness, participation, citizen participation, consensus-oriented decisions, or equity in the adherence to the rule of law. Because the monarchy was the law. They are the law. And so they don't answer to nobody. They kill their king, as it were, and rule their country. Now, follow me here. After the monarchy, so we have the Imperial Israel, we have Tribal League, and we had monarchy. But after the monarchy project ended, and the Israelites returned to Judah, the prophet Zechariah advocated for a diarchic model of governance. A diarchic model of governance in which political and religious leaders share governing responsibility in rebuilding people's lives. Now, you also had Ezekiel 40-48 advocating for hierarchy, a nation ruled by priests. Then you have Haggai, clamoring for a restoration of the Davidic monarchy through Zerubbabel, a member of the Davidic house. Now, the diarchic model of governance is about the separation of powers. The Bible also contains principles that have influenced the concept of the separation of powers in governance. For example, in the Old Testament, the prophet Samuel warns the Israelites about the dangers of centralized control and advocates for a system of judges to distribute authority. And so the diarchic model emphasizes politics, the administering the power and governance of the state, or public policy within the complex of human relations in society or in church-state relationship. Now, both faith and public policy administration are to be held in tension. Now, Dixon has asked me to deal with the biblical theological aspect of good governance, and here it is coming. Both faith and public policy administration are to be held in tension, not polarized. The state is neither independent of God's rule nor exempt from morality. And neither is the church to avoid being exposed to ridicule and victimization from endeavoring to influence public policy and protect its image. Faith is not to hover over the complex of human relations in society or public policy. Concrete commitment and involvement are to be risked in the praxis of faith. Furthermore, it cannot be overlooked that the church exists in a socio-political economic context. The church lives its life in society. It is an integral part of society. And people must be related to and responded to in the totality of the concrete realities of their lives. Thus, the social, cultural, and economic conditions of people's lives cannot be divorced from matters of faith. The commerce between faith, practice, and politics must bring about a social process that aims to pursue justice and faith for human flourishing. Thank you. The diarchic governance model then allows for justice and righteousness. Laws and policies promote society's well-being and upholds the rights of all persons, particularly the vulnerable and the marginalized. It also allows for servant leadership, as you have heard before, as leaders are called to serve the people they govern. Now, so we have imperial Egypt, we have tribal Israel, we have the monarchy, and we have the diarchic model. There is also the temple state system of governance. In addition, the ending of the monarchy project and the Israelites' return to Judah witnessed the development of the temple state system of governance. And this is to be differentiated from the temple built by Solomon and destroyed by the Babylonians in 586. The second temple was constructed under Zerubbabel's leadership in 522 BCE. Now, the temple was a center of government, fiscal administration, and so on. And Judaism became a temple-based religion in Galilee and Jerusalem. The temple state system was the fundamental institution of imperial control. Beside offering sacrifices to the God of Israel on behalf of the Roman sovereign, priests were responsible for collecting tribute to Rome. A combination of imperial and religious taxation brought unbearable social pressures on the peasantry. Tribute to Rome, taxes to client rulers, and tithes and offering to the temple and priests aristocracy. Consequently, many peasants fell into a vicious cycle of unpayable debts, and village communities disintegrated as many were sold into Egypt or escaped into the hills to avoid slavery and imprisonment. Now, hear this. So, Judaism in Galilee and Jerusalem was a setting of political oppression, Rome, economic exploitation, the temple state system, and social marginalization, the deteriorating social condition of an agricultural society. Conditions, systems, and structures that do not make for good governance. Within economic exploitation and social marginalization, transparency and responsiveness to the citrusy, accountability, citizen participation, consensus-oriented decision, and equity in the adherence to the rule of law do not characterize governance in the temple state system. And so we come then to the forms of governance in the Caribbean. The Caribbean is a created community. So from its inception, the Caribbean was to serve purposes that were irrelevant to and not in the interest of its own economic and political advancement and development. The Caribbean has never had, neither at its inception nor now, complete control of the decision-making processes and the forces and system of production. When people are deprived of the right to self-determination or to name who or what they are and denied self-determination or deciding their future, they are powerless. Now, during the colonial era, 1492 to 1838, the Caribbean was ruled by the plantocracy. Plantocracy rule involved dictatorial control of society and economic, political, and religious decision-making machinery. In the post-emancipation era, 1840 to 1959, the context was one of, on the one hand, privilege and power for the Bakra minority group, and on the other, powerlessness and inferiority for the Neger majority group. In the middle, the mulatto group despised association with the Negro majority, as that group jeopardized their opportunities for upward social mobility. Notwithstanding, the mulatto group was denied control of the decision-making processes and the forces of production of the society by the Bakra ruling minority. And so what we had in the emancipation period, the guardians were the gods. The guardians were the gods, as the Bakra minority group was the guardians and keepers to the mulatto and the Negro groups. In the post-independence era, 1959 onwards, that was one of political and economic self-determination in which Caribbean governments and people sought to build their communities by and for themselves. The efforts fell on hard times. Political self-determination was not matched by economic independence or regional unity. A dependency process was set in train that did more to enforce political and economic dependence for Caribbean countries than to foster the ability to determine their future. Now, this brief history of the Caribbean demonstrates that governance varies across the region due to historical, cultural, political differences among the countries and territories. The Westminster style of governance refers to a political system modeled after the United Kingdom's Westminster system, which was imposed upon and practiced in the Caribbean. And so in the Caribbean, our system of governance had standard features and variation: independent overseas territories, parliamentary systems, presidential systems. Overall, there are commonalities in the governance structure across the Caribbean. Each country and territory has distinct political and institutional arrangements shaped by history, culture, and socioeconomic context. But listen to this. However, Haiti in 1804, or beginning in 1784 if you wish, Cuba in 1959, and Grenada in 1979 sought to create their system of governance that was quite distinct from the Westminster style of governance. Several governance challenges, such as corruption, economic inequality, crime, and majoritarianism, where the majority or the coalition dominates decision-making without much input from the minority parties, potentially ignoring diverse perspectives, drove movements to bring about revolutionary socio-political changes, breaking from the fundamental principles and structures of the British model. Now, let me conclude by pointing to the strengths and weakness of a term that I've just introduced, the majority, but we want to extend it now into an ism, into an ideology. Majoritarianism, right? The majority, majoritarianism. Now listen to this. The Westminster-style parliamentary system of governance has bequeathed a situation in which the Caribbean, what we have, you look in the parliament around the Caribbean, look in Jamaica Parliament, what we have is insular black political power reigning and white economic foreign capital ruling. That is what we have. That is what we have. Insular black political power reigning and white economic foreign capital reigning. This ecostructure would find it challenging to allow a system to pursue justice and truth for human flourishing. The problem is majoritarianism, a political philosophy and principle that asserts that the majority of the population should hold power to make decisions. Now, while majoritarianism can lead to swift decision-making and action since decisions are made by the majority, avoiding the need for extensive negotiation or compromise, ensures that the government or ruling body has a clear mandate from the majority of the population, which can enhance legitimacy and stability, promotes transparency and accountability in decision-making processes, and guarantees that the views and interests of the majority are prioritized, leading to policies that reflect the preferences of the majority. Majoritarianism can also lead to minority rights, the marginalization and the oppression of the minority groups, as their voices may be ignored or overridden by the majority, Jamaican Parliament. That it risks that the majority might oppress or discriminate against minority groups, leading to what is called the tyranny, the tyranny of the majority. Situations where the majority rights are not practiced. It can exacerbate social divisions and polarization, as politicians may prioritize appealing to the majority rather than seeking consensus or compromise. Polarization. It can exclude minority voices from the political process, leading to feelings of alienation and disenfranchisement among the marginalized group. Exclusion. It leads to outcomes that do not actually reflect the diversity of opinions within the population. Unrepresentative outcome. It encourages the tendency for majority governments to focus on short-term gains or popular policies rather than considering the long-term implications of their decision. What is called short-termism. So this philosophy, this idea of majoritarianism, it can lead to, it is characterized by minority rights, the tyranny of the majority, polarization, exclusion, unrepresentative outcomes, and short-termism. Now, majoritarianism facilitates then the efficient decision-making and clear mandates. However, as I've pointed out, it carries significant risk, particularly concerning protecting minority rights and the potential for polarization and exclusion, and makes the pursuit of justice and truth for human flourishing a challenge. Perhaps we might want to conclude with Reverend Ronald G. Thwaites, an attorney at law, former member of Parliament for Kingston Central and Minister of Education. And he writes, people want a new system of government which limits constitutional dictatorship, removes repeated threats to civil liberties, modifies the winner-take-all bias of the Westminster model, and in great part has coarted development and human flourishing by its inherent divisiveness. Can we conclude with Ronald? I thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Dr. Thomas. You have delivered to us heavy stuff, a lot of stuff to think about, and to, as we think about what you have said, you have caused us to relook at our system of governance and how we proceed to make things balance as we go through this society and life. To respond to the presenter, I'm going to invite Mr. Lloyd B. Smith to come at this point.
Good evening, everyone. I think the courtesies have already been extended, so I will, in the interest of time, I will not go through that process again. I just said to our esteemed guest presenter that
He has laid out the architecture, the overall structure. What is now needed is a demolition crew. Because the harsh reality is that we are all victims of history, of traditions, and various peculiarities that have emerged over the years from slavery, colonialism, to our present state. I must commend the speaker for a very comprehensive presentation. I would just want to pick out a few things to look at specifically. But I want to stress that for me, one of the things that struck me at the very outset in the theme, it says, good governance in pursuit of justice and truth for human flourishing. I'm putting it to you that truth has to come before justice. And I will elaborate further on that. Jamaica, as we are now, and based on what our good presenter has said, is a society steeped in tribalism. It began with Alexander Bustamante and Norman Manley, who initially, at the very outset of our political dispensation, sat on the same platform and were both members of the same political party. But soon, given, as was pointed out, the so-called Westminster model, which insists that there is the first past the post principle as to who should lead, Bustamante left the PMP, and from then on we had the war of the cousins, because as you know they were both cousins, and in that case cousin and cousin never make good soup at all. So up to this day, in the national psyche of Jamaicans is this divisiveness, this tribalism. And it is said that one of the first casualties of war is the truth. And you only have to look at what is happening in Jamaica today to see how often the truth has become a major casualty, with persons taking different positions as it may suit them. As for justice, I think it was a very famous Black American author, Langston Hughes, who once said that justice is a blind goddess, is a thing to which we blacks are wise. Her blindfold hides two festering sores, which once perhaps were eyes. I don't know if you realize it, but the symbol of justice is of this person holding up the scale but is blindfolded. Let that sink in. So the fact of the matter is that both truth and justice, yes, from a philosophical perspective, are things that we should aspire towards. But when we begin to drill down historically and otherwise, psychologically and sociologically and politically, both truth and justice become endangered species. It is significant that the church, through your organization, has set out to explore this issue. Because after all, contextually, the church, from the very inception of Jamaica's political existence, has been an integral part of the process. And it seems to me as was pointed out by our guest presenter, that the church will have to play an even more important role in the evolution of Jamaica going forward. He spoke specifically of servant leadership, a very, very critical area in governance, which is seriously lacking in Jamaica today. Servant leadership, because when you even take a look at the current discussions surrounding constitutional reform, basically, I don't like to use the expression, but I'm going to use it, Sometimes all we're doing is swapping black dog for monkey. And I say that unapologetically. Because what I see happening is that we just want to remove King Charles III and put in either King Owens I or King Golden I, in essence. Because our political system is still based on this principle of I am king, I rule. And unless we are able to change that architecture, sir, Mr. Presenter, we're not going to get anywhere. Servant leadership, which speaks, and I know Trevor Monroe, my good friend, is one of those who espouses this idea, because servant leadership speaks to all those qualities of good governance. Being responsive and responsible. We are not getting that. And so, I would want to suggest that we have to begin to seriously look at the whole business of another side to this coin. Because in our discussion, we tend to focus more on those who govern. But what about those who are being governed? On the one hand, we have leadership. On the other hand, we have followership. And I'm saying, and I will soon sit because, as I often say, I am short in stature, so whatever I do tend to be very short. I don't tend to go on forever. But, Honorable Costa, some things take a little time, wouldn't you say? Yes. So the point is that our followership, stop and think about it. It's not just in governance, it can't be just about leadership. It also has to be about followership. And when we look at Jamaica today, based on all that was posited a while ago by our esteemed presenter, the fact is that one of the greatest failures of Jamaica's political development is that the followership have been sheep, lambs to the slaughter. It started with Alexander Bustamante. We will follow Bustamante until we die. And then we have in the PMP people saying, up to the dog in a yard, a PMP. The followership, in a very blind way, allows the leadership to be fully in charge, with no accountability, no transparency, no responsiveness. And if we are going to reach a stage, and that is the essence of my presentation, if we are going to reach a stage where we are going to end up with good governance, followership will have to change how it operates. And for that to happen, again, we have to go back to what the church stood for even before independence: education. Until we sufficiently educate the masses to fully understand what governance is about, we are wasting our time. And those who govern will continue to carve out a system of governance that make them just another King Charles or Queen Elizabeth II. That's all that's going to happen. Jamaica did not, like some other countries, have a revolution to bring it into political independence. Some have argued that maybe that should have been so, that maybe the followership would have been more responsive now in terms of patriotism. Let us not forget that up till recently, when polls were done, over 60% of Jamaicans said they feel that they would have been better off if Jamaica had remained a British colony. And even now, as we face becoming a republic, the government, both parties deep down are nervous with this referendum thing, you know. Because what a afterclaps is when the referendum come, the majority of Jamaicans say, no, we want to stay with King Charles, because we will get better treatment. It's not a joking matter, you know. The Minister of Legal and Constitutional Affairs hinted at it when she says that having a referendum is going to be a very risky business. And so in closing, because I don't want to go on forever, I'm suggesting that based on what was outlined by our esteemed speaker, setting out the architecture of where we're coming from biblical times to now, the reality is we now have to begin to focus more on the followership. And for that to happen, we have to go back to the whole business of education. Marcus Mosiah Garvey said that a people that does not understand its past or its history is condemned to repeat that history, or even worse, to go down in penury. And that is where we are now. When you look at the fact that there is that elephant in the room called social media, because again, sir, my esteemed presenter, the truth, pastors here present, has become a casualty because of social media. What is truth anymore? Stop and think about it. I go on social media sometimes and some things I say, what am I to believe? What is truth? There are so many variations of truth. And that's the dilemma we face. And in all of that, justice also becomes a contorted element. And that is why, for example, so many Jamaicans take the law into their own hands. Because for them, there is no justice. And as Peter Tosh said, there can be no peace without justice. My friends, I think we have to face the reality that we have to demolish what now exists and start afresh. And part of that demolition must be the retrofitting of the minds of Jamaicans via education. It's going to be a long process. It's going to be a long process. It's not going to be an overnight thing. But we have to start now. Because the majority of Jamaicans right now don't have a clue about governance. They don't have a clue about what you and I are sitting here talking about. Governance doesn't have any meaning to them. They are looking at bread and butter issues, and we have to find a way to show them that without governance, bread and butter will mean nothing in the very final analysis. I thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smith, for sharing and calling our attention for the need of education, that in order for us to progress, we have to educate the mass, those who are following. I'm going to invite Mr. Clinton Pickering to come and respond at this time.
Wow. You've heard from the speaker. I really am a writer, not a speaker. And therefore, I would like to start off with a multi-pronged definition of governance. And, see, technology plays a very important role. It says governance is the process of making and enforcing decisions within an organization or society. It encompasses decision-making, rule-setting, and enforcement mechanisms to guide the functioning of an organization or society. Effective governance is essential for maintaining order, achieving objectives, and addressing the needs of the community or members within the organization. Furthermore, effective governance promotes transparency, fosters trust among stakeholders, and adapts to changing circumstances, ensuring the organization or society remains responsive and resilient in achieving its goals. It is the process of interactions through the laws, social norms, power that is social and political power, or language as structured in communication of an organized society over a social system that, of course, may be family, social group, formal or informal organization, and a territory under a jurisdiction or across territories. It is done by the government of a state, by a market, or by a network. It is the process of choosing the right course among the actors involved in a collective problem that leads to the creation, reinforcement, or reproduction of acceptable conduct and social order. In lay terms, it could be described as the processes that exist in and between formal institutions. Now, as I listened to the Reverend Dr. Oral Thomas, I'm going to suggest to you that the first half of his presentation, he lost me. No, you see, I'm not, as I said, I'm not a speaker. He lost me, not because he wasn't saying things that was pertinent as such, but, today's generation, and I have to think along with them to survive, are not interested in what I'm, back then. You see, for the purposes of those church leaders who are listening, it makes sense. But if we want to reach the masses, the people, and if we want to talk about majoritarianism, getting the majority of people to listen, to adhere to what we have to say to them, then we have to come forward into this and the ongoing times. Because really and truly, what happened even 20 years ago is really long time history to today's people, right? Their concern is what's happening here and now and in the future. Because see, we are talking about it's a generation of iPhones and tablets and those flicking those switches to turn on the television or the cable, right? This is where we are. And if we're really serious about reaching people, we have to relate to their language. I'm not saying we should be like them, but we must be able to relate to them at a level that they will understand and appreciate the importance of what is being conveyed to them. And I get back to the word of majoritarianism. In Jamaica today, we talk about the political divide. And, when we speak about the political divide, what are we talking about? The PNP and the JP? Well, guess what? The majority of Jamaicans today have very little, if any, interest in the PNP and the JLP. And you know, if you check the voting statistics for the past few years, you understand what the truth to what I'm saying. You know, people, the days of following Buster till I die or walking behind Norman Malley or what have you, you know, people aren't interested in that these days. They are, however, interested in bread and butter issues as it relates to their daily living. Right, Reverend? And materialism, exactly. And you know, the reason why, for example, you know, okay, 20 years ago, if the question of monarchical rule, colonialism, you know, everybody would have been saying, yeah man, get rid of the queen, kick out the king. Right? But no, it's not that they want to be governed under monarchical system. They just have lost interest. Right? And I say to you, they have lost interest not only in that, but a lot have lost interest in the church. And this is where I get myself in trouble. But a lot have lost interest in the church. No, I guess I should say the Orthodox Church. Because we are seeing all sorts of churches springing up. And different theologies being preached, and you know, a lot of them you wonder how different what they preach is different from what the Oberman preaches. But they are there, and they are reaching the minds of people, and they are being enriched by it. So, Reverend Oral Thomas, do you want us to be caught up in what obtained back in the days of the Israelites and the Philistines and so on and so forth, or do you want to win us over by relating what is happening today to the importance of adhering to the principles of governance and truth? See, justice, truth be yours forever. That's what we say, you know. Maybe we should stop singing it, although it's our anthem. But recognizing that it's a prayer, we should be saying it more often as a prayerfully in our, you know, in our groups, in our churches. And well, because you see, in looking at governance and coming forward, while we must consider what is happening around us, let's take Russia and Ukraine. Doesn't Russia have a system of governance? And doesn't Ukraine have a system of governance? But shall the twain meet? If so, why are they at each other's jugular throats? Okay, let's switch across to Israel and Palestine. You know, in growing up, in going through high school and doing religious history, I always thought that Israel and Palestine were bosom buddies, you know, and that, you know, they would be setting the stage for religious tolerance. But is that so today? Far from it being so today, right? Today they are bitter enemies. And I would suggest to you that we in Jamaica must be more cognizant of the fact that we are not living our motto of out of many one people. We're not. Why? Because racism still exists in Jamaica. The social strata, right? We still have a situation in which people are snubbed because of where they live. In the ghetto, we still call it the ghetto, don't we? Because of the color of their skin. And it's two-way. Don't get me wrong. There are those people who are dark-colored in skin tone who resent those who are of, clear-colored hue, and vice versa. It's not a one-way street at all. The question, therefore, is, sir, how can the church, as a body, united, or is it supposed to be united? Because, the question is, does in the Jamaica Council of Churches, is it really a body united? It's a question I'm throwing out. I cannot answer it. I'm not in it. But then again, when I look around and see the different denominations that are members of the Jamaica Council of Churches, and you listen to the preachings of these different denominations at times, you got to ask yourself, is this really a body united? Because, so I better not get myself in trouble. Well, ladies and gentlemen, do you know that that politics evolved out of the church? Anyone challenging me? Time, yes. Well, I'm being told that time is up, and I will leave on that note. So please, folks, the reality of it is this: justice, truth be ours forever. It is still something that we're searching for. I thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Clinton Pickering. And we continue with the responses, and we invite Ms. Karina Gale to come and share at this time. And after Ms. Gale share, we go into conversations where we take questions and answers. And we are going to give persons on the Zoom platform, yes, to share, to ask your questions. So you can go ahead and place your questions in the chat, in the Zoom chat, and to the person that you would like to answer the question. Those on the YouTube platform, you can also place your questions in the comment section, and we will make a note of them. So invite Ms. Gale now to come to share.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for allowing me this opportunity, firstly, and thank you all for coming here to discuss the theme, Good Governance, the Pursuit of Justice and Truth for Human Flourishing. Now, it's essential for us to remember that the Jamaican society was built on Christian principles. If we're to think of when the Spaniards arrived, the British arrived, they were here to evangelize and indoctrinate. Now, these principles have long guided our actions and decisions and function as our moral compass. Today, we must let these values lead us in promoting good governance. Well, we already heard what good governance was, but just to reiterate, it involves processes and structures that guide political and socio-economic relationships, emphasizing the rule of law, transparency, responsiveness, equity, inclusiveness, effectiveness, and accountability. All these elements are crucial for ensuring that public institutions manage public affairs and resources in a manner that respects human rights and is free from abuse and corruption. Now, we may be wondering how Christianity facilitates good governance. And what it does is that it provides a strong foundation for good governance with its emphasis on morality and ethical values. The teachings of Christ urge us to act with integrity, fairness, and compassion, which are values effective for good governance. Christianity also emphasizes service to others, respect for human dignity, and the importance of truth and justice. These values, when combined, can help us build a society where everyone is treated fairly and the government acts in the best interest of all its citizens. Now, our governance concerns in Jamaica are many, but I will focus on two for today. Firstly, let's look at the presence of the monarchy. Now, with the monarch as the head of state, we use the Westminster system of government, which was described as divisive, my apologies. We must remember that this comes from our colonial legacy, and it still affects us in Jamaica, diminishing our sense of autonomy and national identity. Now, a lot of people argue that having a foreign monarch as a symbolic leader undermines our sovereignty, and it should be shed as we strive for full independence. This situation can create a sense of disconnect between the government and the people, as the head of state is not directly accountable to Jamaicans. Moving towards a republic with a Jamaican head of state could strengthen our national pride, but it raises the question, are we moving towards an executive leader? And as Mr. Smith said, are we going to go to a King Holness I or a King Holness II? Or are we moving towards having a ceremonial leader? This brings me to Proverbs 29 verse 2, which says, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. But when the wicked rule, the people groan. This scripture highlights the importance of having leaders who are directly accountable to their people, fostering a sense of justice and national unity. My next point is the lack of accountability by some individuals in our government. I will limit this to the incidents of the permanent secretary. The permanent secretary in our government is here to ensure continuity and efficient administration. For those of us who are unaware, this is the individual who is the chief policy advisor. But there is often insufficient oversight, and their roles often fall short, leading to complacency and a lack of responsiveness to public needs. This lack of accountability may result in mismanagement of resources and ineffective service delivery, undermining public trust and decreasing legitimacy in our government. To address this, we need stronger oversight mechanisms to ensure that public officials are held accountable. Luke 16 verse 10, whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much. And whoever is dishonest with very little will also be dishonest with much. This scripture underscores the importance of accountability and integrity in governance. While there are many more issues which I could speak on, I will now move on to our recommendations that us as youth would have discussed. So in an effort to tackle these challenges, we should look to Christian principles for guidance. We must look at morality and ethical values, service and care, advocacy and awareness. As it relates to morality and ethical values, I was brought to the scripture, Proverbs 11 and verse 3. The integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. Religious leaders, we're asking you to advocate for honesty and transparency in both the public and the private sectors. We're asking you to work within our communities to ensure that these values are upheld. Because once they are upheld in our communities, we can create a culture that rejects corruption and upholds justice. As it relates to service and care, Christian teachings emphasize the importance of serving others. Mark 10 and verse 45 tells us, "For even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." The church, in collaboration with the government, can organize community service initiatives that address local needs such as healthcare, education, and poverty alleviation, so we can improve the lives of the marginalized and disenfranchised. Advocacy and awareness. I would like to believe, or I strongly believe, better yet, that the church has a powerful voice in our society. And with this voice, we can raise awareness about governance issues. Proverbs 31 verses 8 through to 9. It instructs us to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly. Defend the rights of the poor and needy. By speaking out against injustice and advocating for ethical leadership, the church can influence public opinion and drive positive change. This includes educate the community, educate the congregation about their rights and their responsibilities as citizens. Isaiah 1 verse 17 further emphasizes this duty. Learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. Through advocacy and awareness, we can promote a society where justice and truth prevail. Conclusively, good governance is rooted, firmly rooted, deeply entrenched in justice and truth, and both are essential for the flourishing of our nation. By addressing the issues which were mentioned, and through active community engagement, and the church's leadership in social justice, we can work towards a more prosperous and just Jamaica. My church, let us commit ourselves to this task, working together as citizens and as members of the church to create a better Jamaica. I thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Karina Gale. We are now going into conversation, questions, and answers. And I just want to point out to our friends on the Zoom platform, if you have a question, you can just raise your hand, and then we will direct you. And once we direct you, you can open your mic and ask your question. So we are going to begin with those who are inside the auditorium. If anyone present here, inside here, if you have a question or a comment you wish to make at this point, a microphone is down there. You can just raise your hand and we will acknowledge you and give you the go-ahead. Any questions or comments from those in the auditorium? Yes. Okay, so we take Mr. Wellesley Gale and then Reverend Kenroy Edwards. Mr. Gale, you may go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Thank you very much, presenters and those who responded. Appreciated the feedback. I have a question for Reverend Dr. Thomas. He painted, as Mr. Lloyd B. Smith alluded to, the architecture of the history of leadership, government, from imperial, tribal, coming all the way up. I wanted to kind of understand what are we proposing now? I've gotten feedback I've heard feedback from the different respondents, but I kind of wanted to hear from you. What are you or the church proposing as an alternative to the quagmire that we're in right now? That's a question I have.
Doc?
As I indicated, I wasn't proposing anything. my task was to unravel, as best as I could, the biblical theological aspects of good governance in its pursuit for justice and truth. And so in doing that, what I attempted to do was to, well, it's a Bible. I was doing theology. Theology comes out of a particular context. And so the context out of which I was going to understand this theologically would have been these forms of governance that are coming from way back when Israel emerged in the Bible. So what I did was to follow Israel all the way through. So, and to do that, we have to examine the context, the imperial context out of which Israel emerged, and that was the Egyptian imperial system. And in that system, in the Hill Country, as I've pointed out, Israel was anti-hierarchical. It was a revolutionary movement. It was not going to subscribe to the subjugation and the exploitation of imperial Egypt. And then I moved the discussion talking about tribal league, and in the tribal league they had a communitarian economy where it was you had equal access to resources. There was no stockpiling. It was each according to its need, such as we have in Acts. But then they moved from that, and they said, when they went over into, they said they want a king like other nations. And I referenced 1 Samuel 8, because then they move into monarchy. Monarchy is a hierarchical system, is a pyramidic system of governance. And if you have a pyramidic system of governance, you're going to have the very few at the top and the masses at the bottom and those in the middle. And those in the middle, they are preventing those at the bottom to come up, and those at the top are preventing those in the middle to come up. So it is a very divisive system that we had there. I moved to what happened in the post-exilic era with what Ezekiel was proposing. Ezekiel was proposing theocracy, that is, rule by priests. He said the priest must rule the nation. Then Zechariah said, no, what we want is a diarchic model. That is, both political leaders and priests must rule the nation. And so we move from the diarchic model, and what I have done now is to move it into the forms of governance that we have in the Caribbean. And clearly the form of government we have in the Caribbean, as Mr. Smith said, is first past the post, is the majority. And that is not set up for social justice. That is coming from the Westminster style parliamentary system of governance with the first past the post system and practices. I don't think that is set up for social justice. That is set up for rule by division. And where you have rule by division, you're going to have contention. That is why the parliaments around the Caribbean are so contentious. And what I have pointed to is that Haiti says, or put that we would not put. So from 1784 culminating in 1804, when they become the first black republic anywhere in the world, the first set of slaves to free themselves. Haiti was free. Once you put foot in Haiti as a slave, you were a free person. Then up came Castro, Cuba in 1959, and then up came Grenada in 1979. And they said, no, we don't want this Westminster style of system. We want a system that suits our own culture and history and the way of our life of our people. And that is what they were building. And look at Cuba. Cuba has withstood 40-something years of embargo, and they're not moving. And in Grenada, until it imploded, it's freedom we're making. That system there was set up for freedom. And so that for me, I think I have done what the General Secretary has asked me to do. Obviously, Brother Clinton doesn't think so. And that's fine, so let the ideas contend. But I was asked to look at the biblical theological underpinnings and posturings and implications for this. So I wasn't really about to propose anything, because where I ended was this whole business of that word I can't pronounce too properly. Majoritarianism. That is what we have, majority rules. And I pointed out to the strengths and the weaknesses of majority rule. So it is over to you. It's over to you. What am I proposing? You see any seed there for a proposal? You see anything there? You see any direction in which we can go?
Well, food for thought. I think so. You obviously you made it clearer that you're really pointing to us. It's for us to think on it. Think on these things. I was thinking though that I have a concept that we look at what works, right? I almost said Dr. Lloyd B. Smith. I like what Mr. Smith said about fellowship, but I have a fervent belief about leadership. I always believe leadership makes a difference. I always say the countries, the institutions, all entities that do well have one thing in common, and it's leadership. He put a spin to it to say it's fellowship. And I was going to ask, how do you get the fellowship to make an impact without leadership, kind of thing, you know? But he mentioned...
Sorry, is that a second question?
I'm just responding to what he said.
A second question?
No, it's not a question. I'm just responding to...
Oh, to Dr. Thomas.
To Dr. Thomas.
Okay.
Yes.
You can finish your follow.
Yes, so I like that. But so I think it's clear now that you wanted us to kind of really think through these things. As I said, I'm thinking we really look at what works. There's no... As a Christian, I know there's no... there's no perfect solution in this world. Well, that's what we believe. But there's stuff that we can work to some extent, and it's based on what works already, right? The top 10 countries have some things in common. The Finland, the Denmark, the Norway, perhaps. Maybe that's where we can start and look and see what they're doing and see how they do it and probably learn a thing or two from them. All right, thank you very much.
Okay, so we take another question or comment from Reverend Kenroy Edwards, and as he comes, I just want to remind those on the Zoom platform that you can ask your questions, just to raise your hand, and then we acknowledge you, and once we acknowledge you, you can open your mic and ask your question or make a comment. Reverend Edwards, your question.
All right, good evening, everyone. May commend our festival queen in terms of her presentation. I want to say that out of all of the panelists, I enjoyed hers the most, and I want to commend her for how she brought forward her point. But a question now that I really want to ask. I was a bit late to the show. So ultimately it is what are we looking to accomplish from this meeting? That's one. And two, if we're speaking of truth and justice, there is no way that truth and justice can be present in our nation if it is not rooted in the God of truth and justice. Reason being, example, when the woman was caught in adultery, everyone wanted to stone her. But a question was asked, he who is without sin, cast the first stone. And persons oftentimes will try to issue out justice in their own wisdom. And in their own wisdom, it might be faulty justice. And so the question, as I said earlier, are we as a church asking for our society to embrace real truth and justice? Because what we have currently is just laws that can be changed at any parliamentary sitting to bring about the goals of our government. So really and truly, what are we trying to accomplish here this evening?
Thank you, Rev. I invite Dr. Thomas to respond, or the General Secretary to give a response on that.
I believe we can give two simple answers to the question of what are we trying to accomplish. At the very basic level, it is an attempt to speak about, to reflect on, and to have a conversation on what matters most to us, how our society functions. Lloyd B pointed to the fact that a lot of people, and so did Mr. Pickering, really think that the real issues of life is what happens with the bread and butter issues. But the bottom line is, if your governance structure, let me back up. There's an American theologian named Jeremiah Wright who once said that your theology affects your sociology affects your economics affects how you live. What we really have to get our people to understand is that life is not just where the table with the mouth and the hand meets, but the real issues of life start when the decisions are made about who we are and where we are and where we can go and where we can't go and how we live and how we should not live. So the purpose, that's the long answer. The purpose of the conversation is for us to start thinking about and helping each other to understand the real issues that affect our lives, one of which is governance. The second answer I would like to give to that question is, what do we want to accomplish? A clearer understanding of how we proceed forward from here. And from here, I mean some of the issues that Ms. Gale spoke about. Constitutional reform, the issues of whether or not we have a constitutional monarchy or a republic. How do we begin to talk about who we are within that context? We have to talk about governance. So we really want to engage dialogue, we really want to engage conversation, but we also want to find a way to make the next steps forward in our national life. I hope I didn't make it too complicated, but that is what we want to accomplish.
Thank you, Reverend Dixon. Are there any other questions or comments from, yes, Reverend Francis? You may proceed. The mic, and then Reverend Michael afterwards.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, presenters, for your contribution. For me, the key thing here is human flourishing.
Yes.
I think that's the objective. That's really the target. I don't know, Brother Pickering, if, because you're asked to respond, if you took it literally to respond to the main presenter, but I wonder if you had any word for us in terms of what would really make for human flourishing on account of the truth and justice that we are looking at as the stepping stones towards this flourishing. And just a comment, Dr. Thomas, it would seem to me that if we think in terms of communitarianism, and communitarianism primarily, that people would react to it and almost reject it, to say are introducing communism. I think that's big difference. Yeah, but it's just how people might want to interpret it. You also mentioned the early church, how the people operated in Acts. I talked about that, and a colleague just brushed me aside and said that was an experiment that went wrong. So we're talking about, human flourishing, but I think it's a steep climb. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Reverend Francis, I am a journalist, not a sociologist. Right? And so I cannot give you a direct answer to the question you asked. However, you notice that flourish starts with F-L-O-U-R. What word is that?
Flour.
Exactly. Bread and butter issues that I mentioned. And really and truly, You know, unless we are able to address those issues right now, you know, we are basically speaking over people's head. Because, you know, they are faced with growing economic hardships, notwithstanding that at the macro level, you know, the country is showing good signs of progress. But the man in the street is not feeling that progress when he goes to the market or the supermarket, right? And so, you know, my response to you therefore is that, you know, let's go back in, you know, since we're going back in time with the church, you know, Christ himself, you know, said, look, you know, hey, you have to feed the people, you have to nourish them, not just spiritually, but if their system is not nourished, they will not be attuned to the scriptures, right? And so he fed them, right? Now, and another thing that really bothers me is this. I believe that the church as a body is too quote-unquote aligned politically. Hey, you asked me to speak as a journalist, and that's what I'm doing.
That's all right.
Okay?
You don't need to apologize.
You know? And it's not just now. You know, I could take you back in time to certain peer persons who are, you know, very much involved in the politics. And, you know, I alluded to this when I spoke of the fact that, you know, politics evolved out of the church. And, you know, I believe that, you know, and while you must not alienate anyone, be it the government, the opposition, or what have you, the church must be in a position where it is bold enough to stand up and stand against, you know, the difficulties, the issues, the challenges that confront the people from the hierarchical system.
All right, thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. After Reverend Michael Francis, then we take a question from Mr. Peter Hardin, who is a part of the Zoom platform. But just to say this, I'm asking that you make your comments and your questions short. Please don't go into a dialogue or a long narrative. Please. Thanks. Yes, Reverend Francis, go ahead.
Thank you very much. Just a thought that passed by my mind when I heard the speakers spoke. The first one is that we are currently suffering the vestiges of colonial majoritarianism now, right? And a part of the problem with that is that in the model that we currently have, or we see in governance, is a top-down model, trickle-down economics, which really does not work. I give God thanks. I work with people from all sectors, from the very top, the middle class, the bottom. And much of the middle class, who used to go home with a paycheck and have at least some certainty, there's nothing, no cushion is there. My thought or my question is this. Do you think that a part of what we grabbed from the north, and we do it now, which is to impose ourselves on people, that they are idiots and they can't work out their own solutions? Could we, do you think, going forward, what governments could do is to engage people? Have, have town halls. We used to have town halls back in the days, you know? Engage people with town halls and make decisions after town halls are had. Don't make decisions and then force things down our throat, which is really a part of the real problems that the common people suffer with in this day and age.
Thank you. Dr. Thomas? You want to come to the mic to make a comment, please? Thanks.
Reverend Francis, you are asking answers because you have answered, you have asked a question, but you have answered it. You said that we should engage them with constituency type engagement. Isn't that what you said? So thanks for thanks for your question, but you have answered it.
And yes, after Mr. Peter Hardin, we take Reverend Smallin. Mr. Peter Hardin, you may go ahead with your question.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for accepting my response. May I just make a comment? I really appreciate the opportunity to listen to the presentation of Dr. Thomas and the three respondents. I feel that this seminar was very good in several respects. Three comments. One is that I think I need to understand that politics is not the exclusive preserve of politicians. All of us have a vested interest in politics because politics comes from the Greek word the polis. The polis was the community around within which people operated. And it was out of that particular context that the whole matter of rulership, governance of people came about. So I think that we also have an interest in the whole issue of governance. And the theme this evening of truth and justice is deeply rooted in the politics of Jamaica. It is very much a part of our national anthem, our national pledge, all of these things. I think, Mr. Margaret, that we are standing on the threshold of something dynamic, something new in Jamaica that we need to embrace. There's another word that I want I'm bringing it, I'm afraid perhaps the time is to respond to it. It's the word kairos. We are at a kairos moment. The kairos moment is a decisive moment in our history. We are not we are at the most pivotal point in the history of Jamaica. When my parents, I was born 2 years before independence. When my parents told about independence, it was something that enthralled them. But it was, when I look back at the entire thing, it was a project that was handed over to us. We did not participate in it at all. And I think that we have a glorious opportunity to engage our people in the pew, on the streets, in the schools, in the communities, to make certain that this decisive moment in our politics is embraced. We have to do that, otherwise now we suffer. And so I want to commend the JCC for doing this evening, and I want to urge the JCC to encourage the churches under its auspices to engage in further teaching. When this hit the nail on this evening, education. And we need to make certain that this particular generation is, we need to write a wisdom. Yes, but Mr. Pickering, people are dealing with their bread and butter issues. But I think we need to also call them while we lobby for them to eat bread and butter. We need to begin and continue the process of education. That when we deal the constitutional changes, we must deal with it. We will be ready to deal with it. It is a moment, a kairos moment, and a decisive moment that we must embrace. An exciting period in Jamaica's history, and I want to be part of it, and we need to encourage and mobilize our people to engage in this particular process. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hardin. Well said. Thank you very much. And your comment is noted. Reverend Smallin, we invite you to ask your question.
Not a question, just a comment that as we have been looking at the theme, and as we are going through the other presentations which will be made later this week and things, one of the things that we have to take into consideration is the fact that governance is not only about political leadership or the leadership of the church. Mr. Pickering made a point about the bread and butter issues. The bread and butter issues, the influence of leadership in church and in politics is guided by the leadership in industry and commerce. When they sit in their offices and they sign a document, it influences everything that happens in the land, and it changes and challenges the course of the politicians, and they are the ones dangling the strings where the leadership elected and appointed, they do the dance to that dangling. Thank you.
Thank you, Rev. Thank you very much. Thank you. Are there any other comments, questions from our friends online? No? All right. I want to say, well, right. I want to say thanks to all of you for your questions and your comments. They are all recorded, and the Jamaica Council of Churches will be paying much attention to what was asked, to what was said in this forum this evening. So what we have done in this space will not fall on deaf ears. Everything will be evaluated, will be looked at, and in looking at all that was shared, all that was said and asked, I know the council will be thinking long and hard on these questions and comments. So I want to thank you for asking, thank you for sharing, and I want to thank our presenter, the Reverend Dr. Oral Thomas. Put your hands together for him. Sir, you have given us food for thought. We were filled, and we will leave this place thinking long and hard on the things you have shared with us. I want to thank Mr. Lloyd B. Smith for his responses earlier, calling us to educate the masses. Put your hands together for him. I want to thank Ms. Karina Gale for her responses as well. And to Mr. Clinton Pickering for your response as well. I want to thank our Custos, the Custos of St. James, who had to leave us early. The Bishop, the Honorable Conrad Pitkin, for his greetings and welcome to us. We want to thank him as well. Put your hands together for him. We want to thank our General Secretary of the Jamaica Council of Churches, the Reverend Newton Dixon, for his introductory statement. And we cannot close this this phrase of thanks without us expressing thanks to the Sam Sharp Teachers College for allowing us to use their facilities. Before I finish the closing remarks, I don't know if the GenSec would want to share anything at this point.
I think I omitted in my opening remarks to mention that our moderator today is the Vice President of the JCC for the County of Cornwall. So thank you very much, Mr. Vice President, for taking us through today's proceedings. I have just one announcement, and this is an announcement that should make those persons who stayed home a little angry and envious. We are going to share in some delectable delights which were prepared by the council, which will go far way, which will be able to stretch very far, probably into our homes, because there's enough for some of us to get a handful. So those of you who did not come, literally dog name your supper. Not dog. We will have it. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Reverend Dixon. And friends, at this point, I invite you to stand. And we are going to sing the national anthem at this point. And after the national anthem, I'm going to invite the chairman of the St. James Ministers Fraternal to pronounce the blessing upon us. Eternal Father, bless our land, guide us with thy mighty hand, keep us free from evil powers, be our light through countless hours. You, our leaders, great defender, grant through wisdom from above, justice, truth be ours forever. Jamaica, land we love. Jamaica, 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 land we love. Teach us true respect for all, response to duty's call. Strengthen us now we to carry, give us vision lest we perish. Now let's send us, Heavenly Father, grant through wisdom from above, justice, truth be ours forever. Jamaica, land we love. Jamaica, Jamaica.